Let's dive right into the story of a man whose brutal, unrelentless life completely rewired history. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're unpacking the incredibly bloody and complex journey of William the Conqueror. We're talking about a guy who didn't just win a shiny crown, he literally altered the entire trajectory of a nation. Now, you might be wondering, how does a hunted, illegitimate 8-year-old grow up to become the absolute most feared king in all of Europe? Think about the sheer scale of the odds stacked against him here. We usually picture medieval kings being born into these golden cradles, right? Handed absolute power on a silver platter. But to actually understand William's iron grip on England later on, we've got to look at just how terrifyingly vulnerable he was as a kid. So before he was the conqueror, he was just a kid carrying a title that basically painted a giant target on his back in a hyper-violent world. Born around 1028, William was the illegitimate son of Duke Robert of Normandy and his mistress Herleva, who was the daughter of a local townsperson, maybe a tanner or an embalmer. And because of this, his enemies had a pretty nasty nickname for him, William the Bastard. Section 1. The Bloody Minority. Let's look at the absolute anarchy that plagued the very first years of his rule as a child duke. When his father died coming back from Jerusalem in 1035, the duchy was plunged into utter, complete chaos. Young William essentially grew up surrounded by murder. He learned real quick that holding on to power meant being absolutely ruthless. Just look at this list of his guardians. One by one, the men tasked with keeping this kid alive were hunted down by rival Norman nobles who wanted control. I mean, his guardian Osborne was slaughtered right inside the young duke's own bedchamber while William was sleeping. How terrifying is that? Imagine being an actual duke, but your Uncle Walter has to constantly hide you in random peasant huts just so you can survive the night without an assassin creeping in? This incredibly unstable, dangerous childhood, it forged a man who was endlessly cautious, highly cunning, and ultimately totally unforgiving. He learned the hard way. Control your vassals, or they will kill you. Which brings us to Section 2, the Crown Crisis. Fast forward to 1066. William has finally consolidated his power, and his timing is perfect because there's a massive power vacuum opening up right across the channel. So in January 1066, England's King Edward the Confessor dies without an heir, and it kicks off this chaotic four-way standoff for the crown. It's like a medieval reality show. You've got Harold Godwinson, the powerful local earl, claiming a deathbed blessing. You've got the King of Norway claiming an old pact. You have the actual royal bloodline in young Edgar. And then there's William, insisting Edward promised him the throne years ago and claiming Harold even swore a holy oath to support him. All these competing claims erupt into what is probably one of the most high-stakes, rapid-fire years in all of European military history. Poor King Harold has to deal with a Norwegian invasion up north, so he races his army there and miraculously wins at Stamford Bridge. But, get this, literally 3 days later, the wind shifts in the English Channel and William's massive invasion fleet lands right down in the south at Pevensey Bay. Section 3, the Battle of Hastings. King Harold now has to force march his completely exhausted troops 200 miles all the way back south to meet William at a hill near Hastings. And the contrast between these two armies is just stark. You have a static, defensive wall of English shields up on Senlac Hill, going against a mobile, highly varied Norman assault, attacking from below. Harold's men locked their shields together so tightly, they formed this almost impenetrable barrier that at first totally threw back the Norman attacks and caused some really heavy casualties. But here is where William's tactical genius shines. He turns a moment of near defeat into a devastating, calculated trap. When a section of his Briton troops panics and runs down the hill, the English make a fatal mistake. They break their invincible shield wall to chase them. Suddenly, a rumor spreads that William is dead. But no way, he throws back his helmet so everyone can see his face, rallies his cavalry, and brutally cuts down the exposed English. And seeing that this actually worked, he intentionally fakes 2 more retreats just to drain the hill of its defenders. Harold is killed, and the English army totally collapses. And the next day brings a truly heartbreaking moment. Harold's grieving mother actually begs William for her son's body, offering its literal weight in pure gold. But William, he coldly refuses. He orders the body thrown into the sea instead. He was sending a loud, clear message. There would be absolutely no romanticizing the old regime. Section 4. Securing the realm.
Because winning the battle definitely did not mean winning the war. The English fiercely resisted their new Norman overlords.
So William basically holds on to his new kingdom through sheer terror, extreme violence, and some incredibly aggressive castle building. Whenever the English rebelled, William's response was, well, apocalyptic. The most horrific example is the harrying of the North. To crush rebellion there, he literally burned the crops, slaughtered the livestock, and destroyed the resources of entire northern shires. He plunged the whole region into a devastating famine. He also started dotting the landscape with these massive, imposing Norman castles, like the famous Tower of London, just as permanent visual reminders of who was boss.
To really wrap your head around the sheer scale of his control, you have to look at the Doomsday Book of 1086. It was this massive survey of who owned what in England. And the number 4 is key here. William had seized so much land that his own personal holdings were worth 4 times as much as the next largest landowner in the entire country, who happened to be his half-brother. He completely wiped out the old Anglo-Saxon aristocracy and handed the spoils straight to his loyal Norman followers.
Finally, Section 5, Death and Norman Legacy. Because despite his absolute power and this unimaginable wealth, William's end was anything but dignified.
It is actually shocking how quickly a man who commanded ultimate, absolute fear was abandoned the literal second he drew his last breath. He gets injured, possibly internally, by his saddle pommel while campaigning in France in 1087. And the moment he dies, his nobles just rush off to secure their own lands. His sons take off to claim their inheritances. Even his servants strip the room bare, steal his clothes, and leave his body completely deserted on the floor.
And it gets worse. A startling, kind of grotesque final fact for a ruler who spent his whole life expanding beyond his boundaries. Even in death, the guy got no peace. A local citizen actually interrupts the funeral, shouting that the church was built on stolen land. Then, when attendants try to hastily cram William's oversized corpse into a stone tomb that was just a bit too small, the body bursts. Yeah. It spread a disgusting odor that literally cleared out the entire church. But the total messiness of his death really can't overshadow the permanent, sweeping changes he forced onto the island. Just look at what he accomplished. He completely severed England's traditional ties to the Viking world of Scandinavia and permanently linked it to France and continental Europe. He totally replaced the native elite and blended English and Norman systems together to create this entirely new, wildly powerful administrative machine. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought about the true legacy of the conqueror. William destroyed the old English aristocracy to build his own. But in doing so, did he actually create the very foundation of the modern English state? Was all that brutal destruction the necessary crucible for a centralized, powerful nation? It's a huge historical debate that rages on to this exact day. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the history you think you know.